Get started. Welcome everyone to the August 22nd, 2024 Colorado Produced Water Consortium meeting. Short agenda today. This is a special meeting to go over and finalize deliverable 5. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But do want to thank everyone for taking time out of the day to participate in this meeting and keep the deliverables happening in a timely manner, and so I do appreciate that. I will hand it over to Director Dalton for some announcements and housekeeping. We do have one person after that signed up for public comment, so we'll do that after Director Dalton provides her announcements and housekeeping, and then we'll dive right into deliverable 5. So with that, I hand it to you, Director Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. As a reminder, please raise your hand to be called on to speak and announce your name. As much as you can remember, I tend to forget that. So, Chair Messner, after my announcements, if we could go around the room and get people's names and the seat that they hold. So my first announcement is we have a new staff member. Her name is Emma Schmidt, and I would like to give Emma an opportunity to introduce herself. Emma?
Hi, everybody. So as Hope said, I am Emma. I'm currently a senior at Colorado State University. I'm majoring in environmental engineering, and I got the awesome opportunity to work with Hope. I'm very excited to be here. My official title is her administrative assistant. We're working on a cooler one right now, trying to find a cooler title. But that is me. I'm very excited to be here, very excited to meet everybody.
Thank you, Emma. The next announcement is many of you have contacted me and wanted to know a little bit more about what the EPA is doing. You might have received it on your news feed, but the EPA has a new oil and gas wastewater management study, and I'm going to hand it off to Tricia to tell us a little more. Tricia?
Yeah, thank you, Hope. Tricia Pfeiffer, EPA Region 8. So yes, EPA Office of Water has recently announced a new study that's going to be looking at produced water discharges under the oil and gas extraction effluent guidelines, which is 40 CFR Part 435. Effluent guidelines are technology-based standards that apply to wastewater discharges from industrial sources. And this study is specifically going to be looking at discharges under subpart E, which is the agriculture and wildlife water use subcategory. Those regs were promulgated in 1979 and allows discharges of produced water west of the 98th meridian if the water is of good enough quality and if it is used at the time of discharge for agriculture or wildlife propagation. So there's been a lot of changes that have occurred in the industry since the time of the reg was promulgated, and such as, like increase of hydraulic fracturing and use of chemical additives. So this study is going to evaluate whether there are affordable and available treatment technologies that can reduce the discharge of pollutants from this industry. And, since effluent guidelines must be economically achievable for the industry as a whole, the key focus of the study will be the cost of produced water treatment technologies. And this study will help inform if the agency is interested in working with to understand cost of treatment technologies, I guess is where I was going with that. But, the agency is interested in working with stakeholders to understand what data exist on treatment technologies and the performance and cost of those technologies. So if you have any available information, please reach out and let me know, and I can put you in touch with the OW study team lead. I'm actually going to be participating on the study too. So I'm excited for that. I'll be doing a detail to headquarters to assist. So thanks, Hope.
Thank you, Tricia. And then my final announcement is a reminder that our September meeting will be in person. It will be in Greeley, Colorado. For those of you who are traveling to Greeley, please make your travel arrangements. And after today's meeting, we'll be sending out a request to complete a Google form. This puts you on the visitors list. This form needs to be completed no later than September 6th. For the public that is listening in today, the September 13th meeting is expected to have a virtual option for public attendance and public comment. The meeting will be recorded. There will be no in-person participation, primarily due to safety concerns, as it's at an industrial facility. I'd like to hand it off to Mark in case he wants to tell us a little more. Mark?
Okay, hey, can you hear me okay? Hey, thanks, Hope. Mark Hepto with Chevron, representing the DJ on the industrial seat. Yeah, thanks. We are working on with Hope and their team to get the final details put together, and I will get, I think, a few more last-minute coordination details, but we're looking forward to hosting the entire consortium to on September 13th. We I'll get some more details out on to Hope that you can disseminate on address and parking information and all those kinds of things. So, but looking forward to host y'all. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mark and Chevron, for hosting our meeting, our in-person meeting in September. And that's all the announcements I had. Chair Messner, do you want to go around and have everyone introduce themselves?
Sure. I wonder, Hope, if I could just read everyone's name just so we can keep the meeting moving here. So I see Tessa Sorensen, Michael Freeman, John Heil, Jeff Kirtland, Rick McCurdy, Tricia Pfeiffer, Michelina Pollock, Irene Andrus, Joseph Ryan, Emma Pinter, Randy Honeycutt, Eric England, Ember Michelle, Jolie Bronner, Barbara Vasquez, Thomas Borch, Mark Hefta, and also joining us are Kyle Davenport, James Rosenblum, Greg Duranlo, and Aaron Saplaco. So that is who we have in the meeting here today. And so with that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is public comment. I will note that we received 3 written public comments that have all been disseminated to you via email. And so some of those came relatively recently, and so you may have not had a chance to read them, but we do have those in your inboxes if you haven't had a chance. And I think we have one person signed up for oral public comment. Has she been elevated? Maybe.
Yes, it was Angelique who had a public comment.
Okay, Angelique, you are recognized for 3 minutes of public comment.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you taking time to hear this public comment. I'm coming to you from Crestone, Colorado, and welcome the energy of this place to the meeting for y'all. Hopefully you can take a deep breath. You can feel that mountain air. What I'd like to speak to today regarding the infrastructure and storage final draft is a request to consider the potentials that are available in the new technologies and new discoveries being explored every day with mycology and the mycelium and the potential of forming a new type of storage tank that has the capacity to be remediating as it's sitting and aligning with our allies and our relatives in this way as we step into a new way, us being the bridge of these old paradigm ideas, understand these things are wanting to be moved forward. However, we all need to remember that the war machine doesn't require as much oil anymore with drones and the AI capacity. So will oil be relevant in the same way in the next 10 years as it is today? And with that concern or thought, I would ask the consortium to recommend exit plans of these things when this industry is not in its prime anymore. What will those exit plans look like? And is there capacity to leave an openness that there will be a plan established in real time from the community that is being affected with the relevant effects, the things that they're truly experiencing, and looking at what needs to be remediated and fixed as a part of the exit strategy. Yeah, and I thank you for your time, and I ask also that we continue to remember that we are water beings, and that is the oneness that aligns us all, and what we do to these waters, we're doing to our own waters. And I invite us to be that bridge to, as we toggle the two worlds, to be open to new ways that the new generation, as I do community work, they're not going to hold this oil standard the same that it's been held in the past. So remembering that this isn't the only way, and that in the interim, this is an opportunity for us to be that bridge and to find these new technologies that might be the middle ground for us all as we move forward and try to build out for our next 7 generations. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Angelique, for taking time to share your thoughts with us here this morning. With that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is finalizing deliverable 5, which is regarding the necessary infrastructure as directed by HB 23-1242, which indicates on or before September 1st, 2024. The Produced Water Consortium will analyze and report on infrastructure, storage, and technology necessary to achieve different levels of recycling and reuse of produced water and oil and gas production basins throughout the state, with specific emphasis on opportunities within the Denver-Julesburg oil and gas production basin. So with that, I will hand it over to Greg Duranlo, who's the environmental manager for ECMC.
Thank you, Chair Messner. Good afternoon, consortium members. Just trying to get my screen shared here. It looks like I've got it shared. Can I get a nod that I've got it?
We can see it. We still see your computer's head.
You'll see the taskbar at the bottom and top.
Read it.
I can't seem to get rid of that, so
Yep.
My apologies. Well, thank you all for having me back. We talked last about deliverable 5 in its draft form. There has been a lot of work done to this document, a lot of input from various consortium members, as well as just, going through the data and trying to make sure that we ECMC got things in here that worked and that we were trying to listen to the feedback that we got at the last meeting and get this, get these data points in here to support some key findings that Aaron will go through at the end of my presentation. So again, I'm Greg Duranlo. I'm the environmental manager at ECMC. And before I get started, I'll offer thanks to Aaron Sidlaco, Arthur Kepsel, and Kat Campbell, who have been working really hard on just getting these figures and tables put together and analyzed and the text and words written to develop what I think is a pretty sound report. So let's see if I can get the slide to advance. So I will be presenting just the data and figures from the final draft of this initial report on infrastructure, storage, and treatment facilities necessary to achieve different levels of recycling and reuse of produced water. And I would have loved it if the title had been less of a mouthful, but there we are. As previously described, this report builds on prior deliverables. I'm not going to discuss those today. We went through sort of that connection in the last meeting. In this report, we've built upon the concepts that were discussed at the prior meeting, and we've worked to develop relevant key findings. As is typically the case, our team has been working right up until this very minute to develop the figures and craft the language. I know that we've seen many of you in the report real time and making comments. So, this is, we're working side by side, and this collaborative effort is great, but we do, there may be some things, if you were popping comments in there right at the very end, we may not have yet addressed them. So I do appreciate that. And I think it's really important to have this collaborative effort to build a comprehensive and meaningful deliverable. So thank you. I will go through just a brief outline of the report, and then I'll go through the data and figures that are contained in each section. At the end, I'll turn it over again to Aaron to summarize the key findings. So this slide just shows an outline of the report, which is based on the table of contents. I'll bring some examples from the underlined sections, but I don't plan on discussing the sections that are not underlined. So we'll talk about these sections here that we were really working on after our last meeting. So first, in the considerations section, the report discusses health and environmental considerations, including wildlife habitat. It discusses socioeconomic and environmental justice considerations, regulatory, legal considerations, and economic and technical considerations as well. I will just talk here about the disproportionately impacted communities within the state of Colorado. These are established by a statutory definition, and they've been mapped here using the Colorado Enviro screen. And you can see that some basins have significant areas included in DI communities. So that includes, the Piceance Basin, the Raton Basin, and the San Juan Basin. And I believe the public comment just received acknowledged that issue with the DI communities in the San Juan Basin. And so obviously that does create a challenge because of the statutory prohibition on siting new centralized water management, water treatment, and storage facilities in those DI communities. And of course, the DI communities are mapped based on census block groups. So that's why those shapes appear the way they do. And so that's a challenge that operators and folks looking to develop additional infrastructure for the treatment and storage of produced water will have to be managing and thinking about as this moves forward. So the next section I'll talk about the evolution of infrastructure in Colorado's oil and gas production basins. And this section was not complete when we last spoke. I think I gave you sort of a sneak peek of where we were going with this. ECMC staff conducted an analysis of the evolution of development and infrastructure over the last decade in Colorado. We looked for geographic patterns or trends as we analyzed pits, centralized E&P waste management facilities, and well completions. So figures 4 through 9 in the report are a time series of pits and centralized E&P waste management facilities starting in 2014. It shows sort of the pre-2014, and then it's basically every 2 years until 2024. And this slide here shows the last 2022, 2023 figure. So you can see in lighter gray the facilities that were previously shown in sort of the previous slides in the or figures in the time series. And then these are the highlighted ones are the most recent construction facilities. And what you can see from looking at that time series, pits that were built in the DJ Basin were largely built outside of the core Wattenberg area. And the few centralized E&P waste management facilities were built in the southern end of the Wattenberg early in the time series. What this shows is that much of the existing produced water treatment storage infrastructure predates the analysis of the period, because many of the facilities that are in use today were from 2006, 2008 time period. So the development in the last decade has not been as robust with those facilities, and it indicates that there are likely ripe opportunities for building out new infrastructure to support recycling and reuse of produced water, and that's especially true in the DJ Basin. So figure 16 is the final figure in the time series showing well completions, and this series didn't really reveal a significant pattern of development, but rather an overall filling out of the basins over the past decade. It does make clear to us that the primary areas to consider as we look forward are the DJ and Piceance basins. The wells that are showing up as completed in the periods in the Raton Basin, most of those are recompletions, and so they're not new well development down there. Not that recompletions shouldn't be considered, but they're not the same completion pattern and water use consumption of what we see in the new well development, for example, in the DJ Basin. And so figure 10 is this chart that shows really the consistency with which the DJ Basin dominates the water used for completions. In every year, the DJ Basin is the dominant water consumer. The Piceance Basin is second, and then the others sometimes show up and sometimes don't. But this chart really continues to emphasize that the area to make the highest impact is the DJ Basin. So knowing that the biggest gains will need to be made in the DJ Basin, as we discuss infrastructure needs, our focus really turns to that basin. And so here, this is figure 18. It shows key resources needed for recycling and reuse in the DJ Basin, produced water flow lines, centralized E&P waste management facilities, pits, and underground injection control disposal wells. This map also shows the DI communities in lighter color than on the prior map, but you can see that the locations of those disproportionately impacted communities, will play a considerable role as facilities may be sited and expanded. And what you can see here is that in order to treat, transport, and store produced water for recycling and reuse, more infrastructure will be needed, and that those infrastructure development needs will have to be done in consideration of those disproportionately impacted communities. We do talk about pits and centralized E&P waste management facilities for produced water management. And these appear to be a key resource for the current recycling methodologies. And most of them, of course, are in the Piceance Basin, as we've discussed before. To expand reuse and recycling in the DJ Basin, there will need to be more of this type of facility, unless there is, are significant technological changes that render them unnecessary. But at this time, we don't see those on the horizon. So, and again, they'll need to be carefully cited in consideration of disproportionately impacted communities and environmental considerations such as wildlife. And here that you can also see that virtually the entire Piceance Basin, is mapped as disproportionately impacted community. So, really, really challenging siting there if they're looking to expand that network on the west slope. The next section of the report, identifying and analyzing requirements for produced water recycling and reuse, really dives into two main concepts: water quality of produced water and the regulatory framework. At the last meeting, I discussed the regulatory framework section, and we hadn't built out the water quality section. So I'll just discuss that a little bit today. In terms of how we approach that. And primarily we approach that as, is our data available, to use to be looking at whether or not produced water quality can be used for recycling and reuse. And so the data that we have available to us is primarily from Rule 909J, which applies to water going into pits. So because it applies to water going into pits, there is really a paucity of data in the core Wattenberg development area, the DJ Basin, where there are virtually no pits. So operators who are producing water there have not had to provide water sample, water quality data under that Rule 909J. Most of the data in the DJ Basin comes from Washington County or up north in Logan County. Excuse me. Additionally, the samples in the Piceance Basin, they appear and they are clustered relatively closely together due to the locations of the pits at centralized E&P waste management facilities. And so, some questions come to mind. There is more local data needed to enhance opportunities for produced water recycling and reuse. If produced water recycling and reuse is done by single operators maintaining control of their water, they probably know and control the water quality parameters they need. But for larger scale movement, water sharing across the region, a better database of water quality data may be necessary, and especially data coming from that core Wattenberg area. So we do have a section in here forecasting recycling and reuse potential. And of course, you all know that I can see the future. So, this was the easy part. And really, since that's not true and I can't see the future, we've had to make a lot of assumptions and hold a lot of things static as we've tried to look, into the future, just to make sure that we could provide, sort of a credible analysis as we move forward. So first, we provided data for the number of wells completed, volume of water used in those well completions, and sort of how that plays out over the state, as well as provided average volumes for each well completion for the years 2021 to 2024, for at least the data that we have so far for 2024. This slide shows the data for 2023, and consistently across the years that we reported on, the DJ Basin makes up over 90% of the total volume of water used in completions. And consistently, it uses more water per well completion. The Piceance Basin is the next biggest water user. But again, this sort of drives home that, by a pretty big margin, the DJ Basin and the Piceance Basin are where the water is used. And so you'll see as we continue to talk that we start to really narrow our focus on those two basins. This is table 8 from the report, and it shows the produced water availability in each basin using the average volume for well completions in that basin, and then it estimates the number of wells that could be completed using all of that water that is produced into well completions. How many wells could you complete? So in the DJ Basin, with over 106, almost 107 million barrels of water produced, and the average water volume used for completion of 376,000, you'll come up with 284 wells. If you'll recall from deliverable number 4, we estimated that there would be 726 wells completed statewide in 2024 and 612 of those in the DJ Basin. So you can see there's a shortfall there. We're down under 50% of the wells that are being completed. So this is a little strange looking in that the completion numbers for the Raton Basin, we could complete or recomplete, as those mostly were, 21,000 wells. No one expects that there's going to be 21,000 wells in the Raton Basin, but just to get a feel for how many, what that looks like with, a surplus of water in the Raton Basin, but a deficit in other areas. So. And whoops. Okay. So here's where we start to really focus in on the two major basins, the DJ Basin and the Piceance Basin, and start to look at, okay, what is, with the recycling that we're doing, what is that sort of statewide, percent recycled or major basins percent recycled, and what we find is in 2022, even with 92% recycled water in the Piceance Basin, with the DJ Basin totals and being only 0.4%, the total recycling rate is only at 9%. Again, this highlights the need for improvements within the DJ Basin if we want to move the needle on the sort of statewide numbers. It's got to be done in the DJ Basin. These tables here, I've sort of combined a few tables from the report, but this shows a projection of if we wanted to move the needle on the statewide recycling rate, at basically kind of 10% increments. What do we need to do in the DJ Basin in order to achieve those results? So, going from 0.4% to 5% recycled in the DJ Basin moves us up 1% statewide. Going up another 5% moves us up to 20% statewide. And then, it takes another kind of 10% bump to move us up to a 30% statewide picture. So just in terms of what it takes to move the needle on a statewide basis, it's moving the needle substantially in the DJ Basin. So that's what we're trying to show with these slides. And that's, we're not trying to make a recommendation that these are the appropriate amounts or rates or anything else. It's just showing that, kind of generally what it takes to move the needle on a statewide basis needs to be done in the DJ Basin. And all that is done without changing the recycling rate on the West Slope in the Piceance Basin. So again, I'm starting to feel like a broken record, but this really does focus on the DJ Basin. This report walks through several issues that'll need to be considered when establishing the requirements or evaluating proposals for recycling and reuse and the opportunities that exist in the DJ Basin. So starting here, this map shows the horizontal development in the Wattenberg field. The blue lines are the drilled wells or drilled and completed wells. The green lines are the permitted but not yet drilled wells. Some of them may be drilled, but just kind of have the paperwork hasn't been completely processed yet. And then orange diamonds are proposed Form 2A locations as of today for planned development. And what you can see is that most of the 2A locations are on the margins of the already developed areas, and that there are some gaps. There's a pretty big gap in the middle of the field and some gaps up here. These gaps that are obviously proposed to be filled with these locations, and gaps up here, gaps between here. that those, we can predict that those gaps in this, will be targeted to be filled by future oil and gas development. So, that's sort of what we're looking at in terms of where does the infrastructure need to be? You'd want to see infrastructure built up on the outside of the field to support that future development. So looking at the centralized E&P waste management facilities that exist currently in the DJ Basin, they have a current capacity of 700 to 900,000 barrels per year throughput. As we saw in prior slides, 5% recycling and reuse in the DJ Basin would require 12 million barrels per year. So obviously there's a shortfall of fluids capacity, of treatment and storage capacity, pretty significant shortfall there. So what technology does that require? That's what we need to see. And then obviously as we increase the recycling rate, then that capacity goes up from there. So bottom line, we need more capacity in order to support additional recycling and reuse. Also, there's a ceiling in the DJ Basin, right? There's less water produced in the basin than is used in the basin. And so the maximum potential would actually only be 39% recycling and reuse if we turn all of the water that is produced in the DJ Basin into well completions. Because some of that water that is produced in the DJ Basin is in remote areas of the DJ Basin. As I mentioned, the Washington County pits, the Logan County pits, farther out, Yuma County, et cetera. Some of that is really not physically available right now in the core of the Wattenberg. So, without intra or interbasin transportation, 39% would really be the ultimate highest you could achieve right now. And then, additionally, there is a statewide deficit of produced water, even if you tally up all the produced water that isn't currently used for recycling, you would be left with a deficit here in the DJ Basin. So those are some considerations and really opportunities for how can those problems and issues be solved and addressed. We go into brief discussions on a number of other opportunities in the DJ Basin, and we don't expect that this is an all-inclusive list, but these are certainly some considerations that we've begun to evaluate. Enhancing wastewater recycling systems, improving water transportation infrastructure, implementing water sharing agreements as they use those on the west slope, upgrading water treatment system facilities so that we're using the best and most appropriate technology, leveraging existing reporting systems so that we are obtaining a better data with the water recycling and reuse that is going on right now, expanding the regulatory frameworks, maybe some considerations there associated with fit for purpose and things like that. Prioritizing high impact areas, and then looking at those other areas that are producing water and whether that could be made available, such as Washington County. That's not too far out. Maybe that's something that could be explored. Right now, that water is going for disposal. So that sort of lays out the sort of data and discussion that we've got within our report. And then I want to turn it over now to Erin Sidlako and have her go through the key findings. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then I will bring up another presentation, and I'll share a presentation for Erin to walk through.
Oh, you're going to share my presentation?
I certainly can.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg.
Sure. If I can figure out one more time how to do it.
Or maybe not.
No,
I
I've
think
got
I'm
I've
not.
got you going here.
Okay,
How's that?
that looks awesome. Thank you, kind sir. Well, thank you, Greg. And hey, everybody. Thanks again for your patience and grace with this one. I'm going to stay off screen as my internet's a bit unstable. I lost Greg earlier and don't want to risk it. I think that's why he stepped in as the white knight to present for me. But I am Erin Sidlako, your friendly neighborhood scientist, the Associate Director for Research, or as you probably more likely know me, Consortium staff. And it's my pleasure today to present you with the findings of this deliverable. This was a beast of a report with a little something for everyone, I think. And if you've been in the document recently, you know that we're continually tweaking it with the best data and most recent updates we have. And that, of course, affects the findings. So this is where we are now. Findings, of course, need to be linked to data, even if it's not the best data, it's the data we have. So here's the key findings for the deliverable linked to the analysis in the infrastructure, storage, and treatment facilities needed report. Now, like Greg alluded to, I'm not a psychic, so it's hard to look into a crystal ball and predict the future. But we used what we know to make some educated guesses. And we landed on these 6 key findings, and we'll go through them. But I know there's a lot of words on this slide. So I just want to summarize that. They can be broken up into 4 main categories. Greg, would you do the honors? Thank you. We have essentially statewide impact of DJ basin recycling, the current capacity versus projected needs, water conservation potential, and logistical and quality considerations. This is an image of a DJ basin driving the bus just for fun. I was hoping to get you a real image of a DJ, but we didn't have time for that today. Anyway, I think this makes it a little more digestible, at least for me. So first is that the DJ is by far the most influential basin to consider, and statewide rates of recycling and reuse will largely be driven by changes made in the DJ basin. By increasing the amount and reuse of recycling from the current 0.4% in the DJ to 26%, we found that the water reuse rate would triple in the DJ and Piance basins by 2034. So increasing the reuse recycling rate solely in the DJ basin would be an effective way to increase the overall reuse of the state. We can also see here the regional variations in water production usage across the basins, and also how little they used when compared to the DJ. So this reinforces that idea that we get more bang for our buck, so to speak, by looking at the DJ. Secondly, thanks. We concluded that despite the potential we just discussed, there's only so much that can really be done in the DJ. The recycling capacity is just not nearly enough to meet the projected needs. DJ Basin's recycling is limited by the volume available, so much so that even 100% recycling would only meet 39% of the local hydraulic fracturing needs. So obviously, there's a need for a substantial increase in treatment and storage capacity. In the DJ alone, to fully utilize the produced water currently generated, we would need the capacity to store and treat approximately 108 million barrels of water. I totally thought that number was wrong, but we all checked the math on that one, and that's where we are. But thankfully, you all have wonderful ideas about potential transport and treatment and storage solutions, and those are all detailed much more in the report. And I encourage all of you to take a look and consider these options for infrastructure development, maybe even forming a task force of some sort to discuss them in the future. Oh, Greg? So, of course, there's a significant potential for water recycling in Colorado's oil and gas industry. And the good news is many of you are already doing it. Even in the DJ Basin, I was really impressed by the work showcased in our case studies. And then lastly, we know the feasibility of developing and implementing that infrastructure and growing what's already working into a larger solution is super complicated and will take a lot of work. The feasibility of using recycled produced water for completions depends on so many things, including water quality, transportation infrastructure, and the ability to store and treat water effectively. Working together in this together is why we're all here. So I think there's nothing too groundbreaking here with these findings, but hopefully it helps put some things into perspective. Last slide, Greg. Thanks again, everybody, for being here and contributing to all of this work. Greg asked me earlier to put a bow on it, and I'm not sure I've done that. But Greg, that bow is for you. That's it for me.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Aaron and Greg, for providing an overview of the report, and for everyone that worked on the report, and for Hope for guiding us to the development of that report. And so really appreciate all the work that's been done with this. I'm sure folks have questions and comments and thoughts, and I'm gonna ask folks to think about their thoughts, write down their questions. We're gonna take a 5-minute break here. Well, we'll take a 7-minute break and come back at 1:55, as we had a scheduled break. Seems like a good time to do that, and then we'll take some time to answer questions and give folks the opportunity to provide comment on the report. So see you all 1:55. To get to the findings that were developed as part of this, I think this is one of those reports that will be an evergreen document, and one that will continue to get worked on as additional data comes in, as better pictures come into focus as to where new development may be and new technologies that might be implemented. So I don't feel like we have to worry that this is like a one-shot deal. I do think this is one we'll continue to work on over the years and continue to update, and one that will help us as we review whatever we decide our target percentages and dates are on an annual basis as directed by statute. So I will open it up for questions or comments on the presentation and the report. Do understand that our goal here today is reviewing deliverable 5. While I'm sure everyone still wants to talk about targets and percentages, I want to focus us today on deliverable 5 in this particular report, so that we can get to a decision and direction to Director Dalton on this report, and whether it's complete or what needs to do to make it complete so she can meet her September 1st deadline. So with that, I'm going to call on Barbara Vasquez first, because she had her hand up before we went to break.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I know this has been a real scramble. I really appreciate what both ECMC and PWC have been doing to try and create this. I have one quick question for Greg and then a comment. Greg, are Class 2 wells included in your category of E&P waste sites?
No, thank you for the question, Barbara. And I should also acknowledge and thank you for your astute eye as you were looking at the data real time, and helped us find some errors in ECMC or data from ECMC databases that we were able to kind of pivot on. But no, the produced water facilities that are shown are pits and centralized E&P waste management facilities.
Yeah.
So,
and
just to clarify, UIC facilities are typically commercially operated, and so because they're commercial, they don't meet the definition of centralized E&P waste management facility.
Okay. Thank you. The calculation, Aaron, on your last slide is daunting in terms of the volume of storage required. Are you assuming that you need to be able to store all the produced water from a year all at once, that there's no flow that might reduce that total storage volume?
Yes, thank you, Barbara, for the question. That it is daunting, right? And it's sort of just a theoretical number, like if everything was at capacity and if so many data limitations that we had included. And this actually comes from deliverable 4 and tables there where we calculated the wells and the amount per well. So that's pretty much all it came down to. But yeah, 100.
But there's no assumption about the dwell time required for a particular volume to be stored in order to be able to reuse it to complete another well.
Correct.
Right, so it's the max.
Absolutely.
And also a comment I had made in the document, just the 39% max doesn't allow for reduction by the excluded volume due to treatment, which of course would vary by the treatment. So just a comment on that 39%. Thank you for giving me the time.
Thanks, Barbara. Mike?
Thanks, Chair Mesner. First, I'd just like to thank all of you for the report. I think there's clearly a huge amount of work went into this on a short time frame, and I think there's a lot of really valuable information and data in it that I think, for me anyways, bring a lot of issues into sharper focus, and I think this will be a really helpful document moving forward. So thanks again. I had a question about the 39% figure and the 26% figure used to estimate the numbers for potential recycling. I understand the idea of focusing that analysis on the DJ and the peons, and it makes total sense to me that to approach it that way, and I think it really shows the extent to which water in the DJ is driving the bus. I'm wondering though, would it be possible to in analyzing what different potential targets would be for 3 years from now, 2030 and 2034, instead of capping DJ recycling at 26% in 2034, to use a higher number, in particular, go to 39%. If the analysis shows that there's enough produced water generated in the DJ to support 39% of new drilling, if the point of the report here is to assess the potential for future recycling, it seems like that would be the number that would make sense to use instead of a lower number like 26%. And I wasn't sure from reading the report where that 26% came from, like, what it was derived from. Whereas in contrast, 39% seemed like a pretty straightforward goal, which is this is the amount of water that we think would be available within the basin for future recycling. And again, 10 years out, giving companies a decade to build up the infrastructure and do the preparation needed to achieve that. And I'm wondering if there was a reason why you didn't use the 39% for those potential goals, and if it would be possible to adjust the numbers to use 39% for the 2034 goal. I can speak to that a little bit. So first, I think we tried to stick with numbers that were sort of discussed, even if generally at the last meeting. Second, I would say that the 39% is really a theoretical maximum. As I mentioned, right, a portion of that 39% is out in Washington County. Is that really available to be used in the Wattenberg? I don't currently know. Maybe in the future, I'm not sure. And I think as to Barbara's last point there, if you treat water, then some of that water is lost in the treatment cycle. So, taking that 39% would probably be unreasonable. Is there a different number that could be used that's closer to 39%? Yes, sure. So I guess I would, say if the consortium wants to direct us to use particular numbers in there, we would be happy to revise those tables as we finalize that report. But that's, I think we use numbers that were somewhat discussed already in the prior meeting.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. And what I might suggest is, I mean, my understanding of this report is that these are not ultimately our recommendation. These are offered as examples of what might potentially be possible. And I think that to set the stage for our upcoming discussions on what those targets ought to be, or those recommendations ought to be, it would be helpful to start with, to set the stage for people reading this report so that they understand, 39%, if we're limiting this to in-basin reuse, 39% is the ceiling here. And that will, I think, illustrate, what that means statewide, what kind of infrastructure and storage would be required for that, and I think lay the foundation for the next step in this analysis. Whereas if we start talking about 26%, it's not really clear where that comes from, what it represents, other than I'm not even sure where, but it seems like it would be helpful for people reading this and for our discussions if we start with, if we're talking about the potential here, start with the ceiling.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I do think it's important to note that those numbers are not recommendations, but rather are hypotheticals, and hypothetical numbers that then some math has been done to determine different things, right? So, while I'm certainly not opposed to, in those hypotheticals having, a high end and a low end, that can make some sense. I think it is actually important in the report to indicate that these really are just hypotheticals, so that as we're making decisions at our next meeting, we can refine that to make whatever percentages that this consortium determines is appropriate. So, so I don't have a problem with having a 39% in there just to create the ends, knowing that we may land somewhere different than that, right? Emma.
Okay, thank you. Emma Pinter, local government seat, Adams County. I read the draft deliverable 5 and reviewed it, and I have it open on my other screen. And either it was not highlighted or I couldn't find the exact quote in that draft deliverable about the 108 million barrels of produced water, which to translate into layperson's terms at 42 gallons per barrel approximately is 4.5 billion gallons of produced water to be stored primarily in the DJ Basin, particularly in the Wattenberg area, which is a heavily populated area. And I sometimes wonder, why did y'all put local government on this consortium? Why was that something important? What can I bring to the table when y'all, I'm surrounded by experts, engineers, scientists, professionals. And there is something I am a professional at and have over a decade of experience in, and that is local government land use and the siting of things. And if you're gonna put 4.5 billion gallons of produced water in the Wattenberg area of the DJ Basin, essentially primarily in Adams County, where 70% of my residents are already disproportionately impacted and already carry most of the state's highways, most of the state's landfills, and we get the airport, which all the money and the profit from the airport already go to Denver, but we get all the pollution. And now you're like, by the way, will you store 4.5 billion gallons of everyone else's dirty water so the state can save more fresh water for everyone else? I can't even begin to articulate the anxiety my neighborhoods and my communities are going to feel about pipelines, let alone storage tanks of that volume, of any volume, and how much anxiety people feel when you put a clean water tank. We had, recalls in multiple of my cities where entire city councils were swept out for placement of clean water tanks. And this proposal at this volume, where local siting and safety controls are like an afterthought in this giant report, like I hear the math, I hear the engineers, and the engineers have engineered, and that's great. But community is going to face the impacts. And I kind of need to take a minute, because to present this in such a stale way that our community is just going to house for everyone else this water without some intense sensitivity around the risk that these neighborhoods will be taking by housing this water of unspecified proprietary FLAC fluid combinations. Like, I need to take a minute. I realize we are at a rapid pace for this consortium. I also realize that we have time to work on this draft, but some sensitivity, some thought for the actual neighborhood. I dare you to go to that community meeting and tell a group of residents, by the way, we're going to put just 1 million gallon tank in your community of water of unspecified frac origin in your neighborhood. I dare you to go to that meeting, because I've been to a community meeting where we're trying to put a clean water tank in, and it is not for the faint of heart. So we have some thinking and some work to do about safety protocols and pipelines if we want to achieve this necessary goal of protecting fresh water. How are we going to protect community in the process?
Thank you, Commissioner Pinter, for your point of view on that. I think this is an important consideration. And I also want to highlight that in that report, that number is misleading, because I think it, as Barbara was trying to highlight, it talks about the total water stored all at once for all the necessary new oil and gas operations that may occur over an entire year. And I think in application, while I'm not suggesting any particular thing or any recommendation, it's a fraction of that number of actual storage at any given time. And I think that needs to be talked about in the report rather than that big number, because we need to be realistic about how much gets stored at any given time. Should there be a determination that higher percentages of produced water may get used rather than the total water needed over an entire year. I mean, that would be like saying this is the amount of water for all of the new oil and gas wells and fresh water that need to get stored all at once, which clearly is not the amount of storage of fresh water that is occurring right now for operations. And so I think there needs to be perspective placed in that. And I think, Commissioner, you bring up a good point as far as making sure that there is consideration as we look at what infrastructure may be necessary as to what the potential impacts may be of that level of storage. And so so I think those are good comments, but I also think as we think about this, that we need to have perspective on what that means in real life when we talk about what that storage looks like or what that transportation looks like. And I'm not sure that the report painted that picture for it. I think next up on my list is Eric Englund.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Eric Englund. In expertise and experience seat. Hopefully you can hear me okay, calling from a remote field operation today. I appreciate comments, and particular to Commissioner Messner's comments, and then also Mike Freeman's, and related back to what Greg presented earlier regarding the recommendations. And I understand that the data provided in the report is not intended to highlight that it is a specific recommendation, but that it's data used to inform about the type of infrastructure that could be needed. And so I think in a method to make that clearer that it's not a recommendation in this particular report. There could be some language that could be changed. And my comments, I don't think, made it to Director Dalton yet, but for an example, on page 73, it references these projected volumes as they are the required % increase per basin necessary to obtain an increase of the recycled water across the state. And so that theme is pretty prevalent through each of the the tables, and then mentioned several times just that this is the projected required %. And in relation to the fact that we're not making a recommendation for required % in this document, there could be a way to better frame that terminology to reference that it is an example of percentages that meet certain targets. Also in relation on, I'm trying to do this here from the field. On finding 8, it also references increasing the amount of produced water that is to be reused or recycled in the DJ Basin from the current 2% to 33%. And I think what could be misleading to some, both in the tables and in the language, is that these target percentages are related to the total water that would be used for a well. These are the recycled percentages of that total water, but they aren't directly the percentages of produced water that is recycled. Because, for instance, what Greg highlighted and also Aaron highlighted, to reach a 39% total water recycle target in the DJ would require 100% of produced water being recycled. So I guess my request is that we could adjust the language in the tables and in the content to better specify that the recycle percentages we're proposing are related to the total water used, or very clearly what recycle percentages are related to the specific produced water that's available. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Irene?
Thank you, Irene Andrus, Environmental Justice Seat. On our last meeting, there was some discussion, and I'm not seeing any mention of it in this report, about the possibility of using injection wells as storage ponds. And would like to get more information on it, because it seems that if the DJ has been putting 97% of their produced water into them, that there's a lot of water there that could potentially be used as well. And can somebody please talk to that to explain if there is something where water can be sent to them and brought out of them? I believe Tessa was the one that talked about that.
I think that's a good question and a good consideration that I think has been talked about a little bit. Greg, was that a consideration at all in development of the numbers or anything like that, or?
No, thanks. So it is something that's been talked about, again, kind of theoretically, not specifically. I think there's enough that would go into that further exploration, further exploration of that as a concept, I think there's value there, but I think it goes sort of beyond the scope of what we were trying to accomplish with this particular report, or with the prior reports as well. I'm not sure if there are water rights implications, property rights implications, the UIC regulatory implications. So I think there's an opportunity for discussion there. I have no idea whether that discussion would lead to this can't be done for technical reasons, this can't be done for economic reasons, this can't be done for legal reasons. The only thing that I think has come up from a technical perspective is that pulling produced water out of a system like that, would be challenging to pull it out at a rate that could then sustain operations on the surface. I'm watching Rick nod his head, and so
I am
actually,
too.
you have some UIC expertise on this panel that would probably be ideal to speak to that.
Could, because as I understand it, they're mainly in the Lions Formation. And if you have sort of them all centralized in this one area and we just need it in the Wattenberg, it seems like two-directional pipeline between the two could possibly alleviate a lot. And I'll let Greg clue me in. Thanks.
Thanks, Irene. Rick, did you have thoughts on that?
Yes. Greg's correct. And one of the issues is we typically put a lot more volume down a UIC well than the technology allows us to pull out. So if we put somewhere between 10 and 20,000 barrels of water a day down a class 2 UIC well, we would have to go in with a submersible pump to try to pull that water out. And at best, within the existing production casing and all that, we're probably going to be lucky if we can pull 3,000 barrels a day out. And the second problem we have, the well bores are already constructed in such a manner that they have tubing going down hole. They're setting in a packer above the disposal zone. We have no way to get a pump in there to pull water out. We'd have to completely redesign the well bore. And to put both a disposal string and a production string in the same, we would have to go to a larger casing size. So we couldn't do it with the existing wells that we'd have. We'd have to redesign the wells just from the get-go and try to determine if that's even technically feasible at all. The other thing is reservoir drive. We'd have to know what's the bottom hole pressure, how high a standing column of water would it hold. Unless you get water up above where this submersible pump is, you can't cool it and it'll burn up. So there's a lot of technical things here. I'm not saying it's impossible, but we're going to have to put a lot of technical study into that. And if while I'm on here, if we can get back to the original, that stored volume, that 108.5 million barrels of water, I put a note in the chat. Just keep in mind that would never be stored at one time. That would, because as you were storing it, you would be using it. So if everything averaged out, that would be 297,000 barrels of water a day. And 297,000 barrels of water a day can be stored in a 3-acre impoundment that's got 12 foot of water in it. So it wouldn't be these massive, huge tanks everywhere. It would just be a couple of smaller tanks or smaller impoundments. You could also store that if we wanted to. We've talked about the minion tanks in here before with the internal bladders. You would need like 16 of those minion tanks to store that much volume for a daily basis. And last thing, congratulations to the staff. This is a well put together report.
Thanks, Rick. Barbara?
Yes, thank you. Actually, last meeting, I was the one who brought up this question, whether this was possible. And I understand the technical issues that you're raising, Rick, but I'm very sensitive to Commissioner Pintner's concern. One of the reasons I'm on this commission is because I was concerned about unintended consequences of transportation and storage of produced water, either raw or treated, on particularly on air quality. So I think it's worth, if staff would agree, to at least put something in the language of this report that says it's worth exploring underground storage, in that it would relieve some of the concerns, not all of them, but some of the concerns about unintended consequences of developing up to 39 or 38 or whatever the number ends up being % reuse in the DJ Basin. So 2 cents. We may not have all the answers. We certainly don't have all the answers, all the data we want to have to produce this report. So I don't think there should be a whole lot of allergy to putting something speculative in this report about potential future underground storage.
Thanks, Barbara. Commissioner Pinter, I noticed you still have your hand up. Is that intentional?
My apologies, that is not intentional.
Tessa?
Yeah, thanks. I want to mention a couple things about the final draft, and it's all about units. So a couple of the data tables in there actually don't have units in the descriptions. So it's got a bunch of numbers, but you don't know exactly what unit of measure that is. It might be worthwhile at the beginning of this report, especially after this discussion, to put a small paragraph about units and what those sizes are. It's very easy to get confused and mind boggled by the sizes of units we're talking about here. To give you an example of that, reservoirs tend to be measured in acre feet. Now, an acre feet is 320,000 gallons. So that's like, I'm doing bad at math, but that's around 10,000, maybe 8,000 barrels. So actually, I might have my numbers wrong by that. It might be 80,000. Anyways, so no, Rick's shaking his head no. So, okay, so it's hard to wrap your head around that. Every year, something like 4 quadrillion gallons of water originates from our streams in Colorado. So there's this huge volume. It's really, that's such a big number. It's almost impossible for the human mind to kind of gather. So let me put it this way. 1 billion gallons is about 3,000 acre feet. That's about 1/10 of Cherry Creek Reservoir, roughly. So you could try and picture what that means for 1 billion gallons. I'm not saying 1 billion gallons is a small volume. It's not. But I do want everyone watching, members and the public alike, to understand that the units here are really hard to wrap your head around because they are so large in this way. And it's hard to kind of imagine that. And I do want to reinforce, saying that number is difficult because it isn't all at one time. That would be a really, really, really big tank. Tanks like that exist, and collection tanks like that do exist. But another number to put in context there before I stop here is that every day in the United States, wastewater treatment plants process about 34 billion gallons per day of wastewater across the entire US. So you bring that down to the local level, you're talking more like 3 to 30 million gallons a day, depending on what kind of area you're servicing. But those are the volumes we're talking about in terms of that. So if you take 1 billion gallons divided by 365, and then figure out what you're looking at for a daily kind of throughput, and then the storage will probably be about, I would say, what, 5 to 20% of that annual throughput, just for overall capacity and up and down fluctuation demands. So just a note on there, and I do think the units do need to be added on the draft, and I think that's all I want to contribute to that conversation.
Thanks, Tessa. Jolie?
Thank you very much. Jolie Bronner, Environmental Justice seat. Just coming off mute I think it goes great after Tessa's comments. I think the units are really challenging to wrap our heads around. And so I appreciate the math, but I want to bring back in Commissioner Pinter's comments, because we're talking about things in a hypothetical sense that are really real in community. And so I just want us to be really mindful when we're doing this, that intention matters, like our intention of how we're speaking about this matters, but how this lands matters too. And there is some dismissal here of like how large these are, what these look like, what this tank means, what these pipelines mean for community. And so as we continue to do this work, I love this idea of an intro paragraph about units. And I would maybe push us to even maybe make it closer to a press release about units, or even an understanding of some of this information as we talk about how accessible is this, because we're talking about this in this space and we're doing really quick math, but it's not super accessible. And some of these sound really big or really small, or people don't understand them. And so as we continue this and we work on our glossaries of terms that make things accessible, as we continue to open up for public comment, and we offer guidance around public comment of what we want to hear from lived experience from your community of interest, what we want to hear when you tell us what your story is and why you're scared of this. Maybe there's educational content that can add some to that about what this does mean. What does that mean if a tank goes into your community? And real information that isn't dismissive of fears, instead educates and lets people know, what are these things? What are the risks? What does that mean for you? Instead of telling people what's going to happen to them. And so I think some of that was some of Emma's input, but I'd really like to just re-elevate that point and just really urge all of us when we talk about this, that it's one thing to have these conversations in this room as we talk about hypothetical numbers and hypothetical percentages and targets, but other people are hearing us and being like, that's my backyard. And so just making sure that we're being really cognizant of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jolie. Rick?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And thanks, Jolie, for reminding me that I should say that my name's Rick McCurdy, and I sat in one of the experience and expertise in produced water seats. And I apologize to that, Director Dalton. I've been reluctant or cognizant to do that before. Two things. Barbara made me think of something, and that is, hopefully as we move forward and we succeed in using more and more produced water and displacing freshwater use, those UIC wells that we have, some of them are not going to be necessary anymore because we're not going to be disposing of as much produced water. So it may be feasible to go in and restructure some of those wells to where we pull water back out of them and start using it. So I do agree that it needs to be mentioned in here, that could be a future possibility to look into that. And to what Jolie was saying a while ago, one of the things that we've done in the New Mexico Consortium has been like one-page fact sheets. And this idea on all the different terminology we use for discussing water, that might be a very good one-page fact sheet that we could put out on the Consortium's website.
Thanks, Rick. Tricia?
Yeah, great conversation. I guess I'll start off by saying I'm not a reservoir engineer, but I was listening to the discussions, and when you're looking at injection, you're looking for formations that have good porosity so that you can put a lot of water away. And I would think that porosity would work both ways. It's easy to inject into, and it should be easy to pull back out. I mean, there may be some kind of chemistry, chemical reactions that happen downhole in the formation that may change that, but I would think it would work both ways. That's just my thoughts. And the other thing about the UIC wells, I think that the produced water that's being disposed in those wells, we should be accounting for that water, because instead of injecting it, we could be reusing it. And the other thing, enhanced oil recovery uses produced water, and that is enhanced oil recovery is where you're pumping into one well to increase reservoir pressure and you're pulling out of another well in the same formation. So there is some engineering that, we know how to do that type of work. And then produced water is also being discussed in the realms in some areas to be used for aquifer storage and recharge. I mean, if you look at UIC injection, if you pull it out, you could consider that aquifer storage and recharge, right? I mean, it's kind of the same principle. You're injecting something in, you're storing it, and then you're pulling it out later. So I do think what is being brought up around the potential to pull produced water back out of formations that have been injected into it, it maybe is not being done yet, but I don't think it should be off the table, and I think it should be included and looked at. Thanks. Oh, sorry, and I don't know if I said who I am. Trish Pfeiffer, EPA. Thanks.
Thanks, Tricia. Tessa?
Yeah, Tessa Sorensen. I just want to quickly add to Tricia's. I am a reservoir engineer, and so it's not so much about the chemistry. Injecting versus pulling back out doesn't always work the same, because once you wet the surfaces of the rock and there's capillary pressure, it's really complicated. But the point of it is that sometimes it can be easier to put it in versus take it out, or vice versa. It also depends on what fluid was there to begin with when you took something out. some of these injection areas are used to have other things in them, and putting water in them changes the way that the actual pressure works. Think of the one we love to use is muddy boots. It can be hard to pull that boot back out, but it's easy to shove it in there, right? So same sort of thing. That's all I wanted to add on that discussion for accessibility terms in terms of plain language.
Thanks. I like the muddy boots.
Harmony?
This question then is for Tessa or for somebody else in the industry. Isn't this pretty much the same as storing natural gas and injecting it and pulling out, which is really customary, or what is the significant difference there?
Well, I certainly can't answer that. Anyone?
So can I jump in on that?
Sure.
Rick McCurdy. So one of the big differences, Harmony, is that when we store natural gas, we compress it. So we put energy into it to where when we go to pull it back out, it's under pressure. So it naturally wants to flow to the surface. Water's non-compressible. So therefore it goes down. It has no way to flow back unless there's a natural reservoir pressure that's available. And that kind of goes back to the earlier comment that, yeah, when we target a UIC formation or a formation suitable for disposal, Tricia was right. We look for one that's has as much porosity as possible. So it's got a lot of void space that you can put water into. But ideally, you don't want a reservoir pressure. You want to be able to just put the water in, not have to put a lot of energy behind it to push it back into that formation. And that is the opposite of what you need to pull it out. To pull it out, you need reservoir pressure to shove that water to the wellbore, make it want to naturally flow to the wellbore, where then you can use an artificial lift method of some type to bring it to the surface. So sometimes these disposal formations work against us. Now, not always the case. It's what they're seeing down in Texas right now. The shallower disposal zones are pressuring up because of all the volume of water that's been put into them over the years. So those would more naturally flow water back in and you could lift water out of them. Just don't know if we're there yet in the DJ.
Thanks, Rick. I do want to note that we probably could have an entire meeting about this topic, and maybe we should. I think it's clearly been identified as something that needs to be included as infrastructure consideration in this report, though. So, Jeff?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner, and Jeff Kirtland with experience, expertise in the peon space and representing operators out here. And I think first of all, great information. Greg and your staff have done an excellent job putting this information together. So just want to emphasize that. One thing I just wanted to mention, and I think there's a really good discussion here on sort of speculative solutions, especially as we're identifying where there's a lot of necessary or a lot of needs rather, as we predict solutions to meet our really important goal. One of the things I think that's sort of glossed over a bit, and I think it's because it's in the legislation, is this idea of a prohibition around centralized E&P facilities. And in some respects, I want to challenge our thinking a little bit as we think about, at least through this report, at least an acknowledgement of an opportunity to rethink that. And I know that's something that's later on in our deliverables when we talk about some of these barriers with respect to the legal and the legislative components. But I would sort of argue that there is a way, I think, and we've shown that specifically with peons to some extent, where it can make sense to continue to locate these facilities by minimizing impacts and doing it in a way that makes sense to help facilitate this goal that we all have collectively. So I just wanted to mention that as something that's, I think, worthy of discussion, or at least of acknowledgement as a part of this. Again, I think it's a big lift considering the fact that there is a legislative mandate with respect to that. I think there was intention, and I don't want to discount that intention at all because of the importance of the communities in this discussion, and want to ensure that we're being very protective of those communities. But I think there's an issue and really a major kind of conflict in trying to find this solution as we're identifying these future requirements to facilitate this goal with respect to this to the activity prohibition. So I just wanted to mention that. I think that's worthy of a lot more discussion, and I'm open to that. But that's all I've got. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I think that is something that could be identified, particularly in situations like the Piceance Basin, where most of the Piceance Basin is identified with the statutory definition as a disproportionately impacted community, but also where a lot of produced water reuse and recycling is occurring and may continue to occur. I would recommend that we defer that evaluation and conversation to that deliverable associated with potential barriers to reuse and recycling, because I think this one is focused on just identifying what infrastructure could be needed should we determine that some level of reuse and recycling is appropriate statewide. And I think the report does identify that, at least when I read it, I thought I read it as, it acknowledging disproportionately impacted communities as areas where some of this centralized produced water treatment facilities may not be located in the future. And so at least identifies that. And then I think a discussion on that may be appropriate for the next deliverable, but that's just my thoughts. Go ahead, Joe.
Just to add on to that, Commissioner, I agree with that. And I think it's important to carry that conversation forward. But in the same way, we're discussing the possibility of changing the policy around using water in an injection well and sort of the challenges associated with that. I think this is comparable in a really good conversation around how we can sort of think about things holistically. So that's why I wanted to mention it, but I agree. I think that next deliverable is important.
Okay, thanks. So good conversation. I might kick it over to Director Dalton here. And Hope, I wonder if you would kind of provide some perspective on what you heard us say and what you think needs to maybe be adjusted in the draft prior to finalizing it, so that we kind of have a summary of, at least from your perspective, what you think you're directed to do, because I'm not sure I know.
Well, thank you, Chair Messner. And so if I miss anything, we do have what people have put into the chat. We do have emails that people have been sending to me. We do have comments that have been left specifically in the draft, and of course the public comments. So we have quite a lot of feedback. So yay. What I'm generally hearing from the conversation is that we need to be careful to identify any projections, or dare I say modeling. I'm sure people are going to be unhappy with that word, but any projections are listed and described just as they are, as scenarios that we're running to see the impact for the future. We also need to probably be consistent with our units, as well as explain units. I've heard the unit conversation even prior to this meeting, and so we do need to go through the report and be consistent with units. Although we've added a little bit on the disproportionately impacted communities, what I'm clearly hearing from this group is we need to look at the entire community impact instead of just, we'll say, the engineered numbers or the data. And so we need to take a holistic approach when running these projections. And then the projections probably need to have a start point, like what if we did nothing? An end point, what if we did whatever that 100% reuse and recycling within the basin looks like, whether that's 39% in the DJ. But let's really look at what if we did nothing? What if we did everything? And then what if we did something in the middle? And then let's see what else. We need to, when we're choosing that middle number, consider the water loss through treatment or through other beams. And then I'm seeing a bunch coming in through the chat, Chair Messner, which I didn't read. I think some of them is to, I remember class 2 wells were brought up several times. We need to make a at least a statement about the potential to store water underground. And let's see. Oh, and several people have mentioned this both in written format as well as verbally here, is the uncertainty in the numbers. We need to identify that for the readers.
Okay. Thanks, Director Dalton, for giving us an overview. Greg, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, we've been trying to track the comments as well. The only thing I would say is, at the end of the day, we will provide, I think we will provide, the calculations or the tables in the format, that you guys decide is the best for the consortium's report, right? So we want to make sure that we're giving you all what you need to say this is a report of the consortium. And so, I think I want, certainly hope to make sure that, she double checks this as we're moving forward on the things that we've picked up. So we'll get together after this and make sure that we're going in the right direction.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to ask the consortium, because this is a product of the consortium, and there's lots of different voices on the consortium. But this report that has been developed as directed by statute, and with feedback from many people in the consortium, the question that I asked for this one, as I've asked for all of them, is do you feel like either the existing draft or with the revisions as identified by Director Dalton just now captures your voice, or do we need to include any dissenting voices as part of this report? Barbara?
Not a dissenting voice, thank you. But I put something on the sidebar of the document asking a question towards the end of the report, whether we can't circle back to the intention of reducing the amount of fresh water used in each river basin, overlapping a map of river basins and oil and gas. I know we're not prepared with data to speak to that. I know that the DJ from the data is the elephant in the room. But again, dewatering river systems across the state is another issue as we face drought. So I'd just like to see something added to the text that brings us back to that overall goal.
Thanks, Barbara. I do think, again, I think this report, and I think that's a good point, and I think that's the overarching goal of the consortium. I do think this is a data report to help us make future decisions. And while I think that that is included, I do think from my perspective, I look at this as data and data that was developed, and no decisions or recommendations coming from it per se, but that it's data to help us with future decision making, as has been all of the reports to date. So that's at least.
I'm just thinking that this is a public document, not only going to the legislature and to ECMC, but also public. And thinking about readers who haven't been steeped in all the detailed conversations we've been having here. So I think it's always helpful, whatever report we put out, that we circle back to that overall goal and intention and flavor some of the text with that point of view.
Sure, I appreciate that. Commissioner Pinter?
Yes, thank you. I am not comfortable with the draft in its current state. I hear what you're saying, that it's a data and it's projections, but it implies outcomes without sufficient parameters to protect local community voice and community safety. And whether we're talking about this being divided up into smaller storage tanks of 1 million, 500,000, or smaller gallon percentages, or a 3-acre pond or underground reservoirs, to where we point is where we're going. And if this is where we're pointing towards this volume of water that needs to be stored and managed in a geographic area without better parameters on how to have community safety and voice and neighborhood safety and voice, I cannot support the draft at this time.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
Yes, thank you, Eric England. Just to follow up what I believe your question was, and also Commissioner Pinter's comments, I would like to see the updated draft before I'd be ready to vote on.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. So, Director Dalton, I think at this stage we'll have to do the updated report and then schedule a special meeting prior to September 1st to give consortium members the ability to review the draft and provide their support or not support for it. Does that seem possible?
Thank you, Chair Messner, Director Hope Dalton. So let's see if that seems possible. I'm almost thinking that writing a paragraph that captures each voice that feels they aren't heard might be easier. So we have to have DNR leadership review anything prior to submittal. So I mean, I could do it really fast and get it to leadership next Thursday so that we can submit it on Friday. We lose the weekend. So we have to submit it by Friday, the 30th. So that means we would have to have the special meeting Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. And that would give staff maybe tomorrow to capture everything. So I think that tight time frame is really difficult.
Okay. So I wonder if we could just do an audible here, because I do want to give staff enough time to be able to work on this and realistically be able to get the necessary input into the draft and give people an opportunity to review it. So I guess my question is, like, how much time do you think would be realistic for you to be able to accomplish this? Is a week good enough? Do you want 10 days? What do you think?
Well, a week is, sorry, Hope Dalton, Director. A week would be much appreciated. We don't have that week. I would like to suggest we could provide an addendum. So like we could finish up the report as it is. And in the cover letter that we submit to the legislature, we could say there's an addendum that is forthcoming in the next month. And then we could really take that month to do some of these analyses that are being requested.
Okay. Jolie, did you have a thought?
I was keeping my hand up to see where we were headed with the conversation. I was going to echo the same concerns that we had for the review of the document. I think if it's made really clear what we're going to be addressing in the addendum, I'd be willing to go that way as well. But if there's ways we can review it ahead of time, but that's why my hand was still up, was to add that I agree.
Can you clarify
Emma.
your concerns with the document? Because that'll help staff be able to capture that.
I think it's just, again, on the volumes and the lack of explanation and clarity around it, the direction we're heading, how hypothetical is this versus how real, how is that going to land in community? Most of the echoing you were saying about what are we doing with all of this? What is our plan? And being more clear instead of the hypothetical of this will probably go somewhere over here. And I think when we're hearing input from one of the community leaders and the input in community in that way, that there's going to be concern, that's where I have a flag too for concern. If we're not landing well with the people who are going to be most affected by this, I don't think it's a clear report. And so that's why I have concerns about putting our name on it. I feel like it's a clear report and we're meeting our deliverables if it is also meeting that education requirement of understanding where we're going. Having a report that's all data with hypotheticals to say, we might do this, makes me concerned for what the next report will look like because of the foundations we're setting up, because we're building each of these as we move forward. So that's kind of where my concerns were.
Okay. Brandy?
I'm kind of echoing what others are saying, Brandy, with CDPHE. I was going to suggest an addendum or an appendix of some kind and kind of discussing our strategy forward and how we might determine more specific information and how we would approach determining that information and where we might put this water, and also putting a community outreach plan together of some kind. It wouldn't have to be a detailed plan, but just a general overview of the fact that we would reach out to community, we would do certain things, maybe not make promises we can't keep, but just to give intention out there that we will be involving community might be helpful.
Thanks, Brandy. Commissioner Pinto, you had your hand up.
I owe everyone donuts. I'll put my hand down now. I'm very sorry.
Thanks. Well, does anyone have heartburn with the concept of an addendum or an appendix? Okay, well,
I
what
think
does that look
addendum
like?
is the best term for that. It's Tessa Sorensen. I think addendum is the best term, not an appendix. An appendix suggests kind of like an exhibit. It's kind of a backup document. This would not be a backup document. It needs to be a primary document produced by the consortium that represents the views that are necessary in addition to what this draft has to represent community voices, I think.
Thanks. Director Dalton, what does that look like to you?
So I don't have a lot of time to process. So hopefully this sounds good. I'm thinking we might strip down the current report to really remove the scenarios and projections and include those with the additional data in the as looking at the whole community as the addendum. And so those projected forecasts would be the addendum, and we would we would review all of the other comments and see if they can be, there's certain sections where people are okay, and we could keep that in the main report. And then where we have significant work to do or questionable data, we will include that in an addendum.
Does that seem like a realistic approach to folks? Does anyone have any thoughts or comments or concerns about that? I don't see anyone commenting. I'll look at the chat. Okay. Well, let's do that then. I certainly want to make sure that staff understands how thankful we are of the work that's been done in a very short time to try to develop this. We are, as we've said the whole time, we were hamstrung to some extent from a timing standpoint by the legislation as to what we had to accomplish and the timeline we had to get it accomplished in. And I do think that staff has worked after hours on the weekends to try to develop these reports in as good a fashion as they could. And so I do thank everyone that has worked on this. And I think at this point, then we'll go with Director Dalton's recommendation and have a stripped down report that will be submitted on September 1st with an addendum to be developed within a month or so after that to also be submitted. And I think Director Dalton, maybe if you could just send out whatever that stripped version is via email at the appropriate time so that people have an opportunity to review it prior to it going out. I think that would be great.
I'll do that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. With that, it's 3 o'clock. I appreciate everyone's thoughts and concerns and time for both participating in the meeting, providing comments, and being respectful of one another's point of views. And also thank everyone for the amount of work that they've done in reading this and absorbing all the information that's coming at you fast and furious. I do look forward to the September 13th meeting, and always available if anyone has any comments or concerns. So thank you. Thank you to Director Dalton, our fearless leader, Greg Duranlo, and Aaron for helping develop the report. And we'll see you all on the 13th.
Thank you.